It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
All right, and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstein Network, the show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports media business industrial complex, carving out our stake in the gab world. How you doing today, Steve?
I'm doing all right, man. How are you?
Oh, not bad. You know, winter.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the weather, all of that. I'm a bit ashamed of myself because I broke one of my cardinal rules of life, and that is I went to go see an art house film. I was just really, I was embarrassed and ashamed, and I was further ashamed that I liked it.
What was it?
The Whale with Brendan Fraser. You heard of this movie?
Yes, I'm well aware of the movie, yes.
See, this is the type of thing that I would never, ever go see because I'm too good to see stupid Hollywood art films. But I was bored. I went to this movie and I found it fascinating. And I think my entire world perspective has got to change now that I've liked one of these movies.
No surprise, happen to enjoy art house cinema. But I'm not planning on. Well, I may see The Whale. I'm not going to be rushing to see The Whale. I'm not a big fan of Darren Aronofsky, who is the director in general. Although I do like the only film of his I actually really like is The Wrestler. Have you seen that, Steve?
I did see The Wrestler, and what's interesting is I watched a review of this movie, The Whale. After I saw that movie, after I saw it in the theater, and the reviewer, who is some YouTube guy whose name I can't remember, so sorry, but he mentioned the fact that Darren Aronofsky has got kind of a history of movies about fathers trying to reconnect with daughters. Because The Wrestler was about that, and there's The Whale. That's the fundamental story behind The Whale too. It's like you have to wonder: does Darren Aronofsky have daddy issues? Or does he have a daughter who hates him, or something? Because there's a reason this man is doing this.
He has a lot of issues. I think it's probably a good starting point with Darren Aronofsky to begin with. But have you ever seen? I mean, the movie that put him on the map is this movie called Requiem for a Dream.
I've never seen that.
It's not really worth seeing. And many people disagree with me. But Jennifer Connelly is in Requiem for the Dream, and I'm not gonna spoiler warnings, but I'll try very carefully. There is a pivotal scene towards the end that has Jennifer Connelly in a excessively compromised position that would get us banned from YouTube if I were to describe it, who then happened to live half a block from me for about the better part of 3 or 4 years.
You mean Jennifer Connelly did?
Yes.
Okay.
So it was very difficult, and I would regularly hold the subway door or pass her on the block or whatever. And
you have this scene playing in your head.
And I have this scene from Requiem for a Dream. I'm trying to think of the Rocketeer, of Labyrinth. Trying to put more positive images of this, I'm sure, lovely and talented woman, Jennifer Connelly, in my head. But you're
going to make all the thirsty dudes now who are listening to go play that movie to try to figure out what you're talking about.
Oh yeah. Well, and then they'll see it, and then they'll go question what they're doing with their lives. Quite frankly. So there you go. So me and Aronofsky go way back. But The Whale, I would see it on. It was I would see it on cable or whatever it is we call cable these days. But I'm not rushing to see it. He's an interesting filmmaker, I would say that.
The movie was very good, though, Chris. I mean, if you appreciate decent literature and movies with symbolism and imagery and stuff, it was one of those. Yeah, but you had to know what you're looking at.
It was a play first, and I think the playwright still wrote the screenplay.
Yeah, I think that's what the movie reviewer I watched said too. It would look like it was very similar to the play.
Brendan Fraser in a fat suit. Are you good with that? Okay. Did it bother you?
No, of course not. Hollywood is so. See, now I'm getting my soul back here. Hollywood is run by people who are utterly ridiculous and absurd. And the idea is that Chris mentioned is that there's been criticism in this movie because Brendan Fraser is not morbidly obese, and the character he's playing is morbidly obese, like 600 pounds, morbidly obese, huge. And so, the fat advocate types are, complaining they didn't get a very, very fat person to play this very, very fat character. But somebody tell me what morbidly obese actor would be good enough to pull off this role. And somebody tell me why it actually matters. It's just so stupid. Don't get me started. We could do the movie podcast.
Chief controversies.
It's an absurd controversy. First of all, name one morbidly obese actor, please.
Yeah.
I mean, let's start there. Feelings. Name a name, and then see if he's as good an actor as Brendan Fraser.
I do like the Brendan Fraser renaissance.
Well, he's got an interesting story, Chris, because he accused one of these Golden Globes. The Golden Globes run by the Hollywood Foreign Press, I think is the name of it. Yeah. And he accused one of those guys of sexually assaulting him.
I think like a top dog, like not just some rando journalist.
Yeah, it was like the head guy, I think. Yeah. And as a result of that, he's like been blackballed from Hollywood for years and years. That's why you haven't seen him. And among other things, that's the chief reason why you haven't seen him in a while. And so this movie is sort of seen as like his comeback because he said he's not going to go to the Golden Globes if he gets nominated.
It was already happened. It was last week. He already didn't go. Yeah.
And did he win or no?
I don't think so, but I didn't,
But I know he didn't go.
But I didn't pay attention.
Yeah. Nobody, you and everyone else.
In fact, we like to follow ratings on the show. It got its either lowest or second lowest rating of all time. It only got 6 million viewers. And the gambit was, here, look at this call back to our theme. The gambit was that they didn't want to compete with the NFL, and the NFL, even in the playoffs, which is usually because the Golden Globes is usually now, so it's usually overlapping, but it's usually the NFL didn't traditionally play a ton of primetime playoff games, right? Maybe they were ending at 8 or 9 when they do those, sometimes like those 5 o'clock starts or whatever. So you still had the primetime schedule to program for, but now the NFL is, we know that what the NFL does. So they're gobbling up more prime real estate. So the Golden Globes decided to go midweek as a way to avoid the NFL altogether. And it delivered them probably their worst ratings ever.
I mean, the fact that I didn't even know the show had happened.
It was like Wednesday.
Yeah, which is, most award shows are on Sundays because everybody's home. It's kind of sort of a family TV night. And it really begs the question of why these awards exist and why is it on television at all?
Brendan Fraser will probably win the Academy Award or be one of the top 3 predicted, if not win it. So right. It is stark that he's, basically, doesn't exist at one and probably wins, or at least is like the favorite in the other.
I'd be proud not to be nominated, not to win the Golden Globe, frankly. That would be better than winning it in my eyes.
Yeah, the Golden Globes are a whole thing on and of itself.
Yeah.
All right, so there you go. So go see The Whale, Steve recommends. So there you go. I haven't really watched anything. Actually, have you seen you probably don't have Hulu, but the new Predator movie, Prey, was quite good.
I don't have Hulu.
Yeah, it's quite good.
I did go see.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I was switching time. Go ahead. Sorry.
It's basically the premise is a predator, because it's not just one, right? It's a planet of people or whatever, aliens. Comes to the American West in the late 1800s and basically takes on a Native American tribe. So it's like this Native American tribe versus the predators, in 1880. And even the predators' technology is a little bit more archaic. It's actually really good.
So I'm laughing because this sounds like some like Hollywood geniuses sitting around going, okay, what's the next old property we can ruin? And so, because they've been through Star Wars, they've been through Star Trek, they've been through like Willow.
Yeah, that's recently. The only conversation going on in any of these is what IP do we already own that we can mine. Yeah, that's all. We can't come up with
our own idea, And so then you get to Predator, and then you say, okay, well, we can't have white people in movies anymore that are the stars. And so what do we do? So let's stick them in in the olden times, we can have Native American cast, and that fills the diversity
You could
quota.
be cynical, Steve, but it's a great movie.
You know what was not a great movie? I also went and see Avatar. Have you seen?
Oh
Did
yeah,
you see this yet?
no,
I,
I've never
I
even seen the original Avatar.
I saw the original once. I've never seen it again, and the original was dumb, but it was also visually spectacular. And this movie was even more dumb and less visually spectacular. So I would not recommend Avatar 2. The story was just utterly ridiculous, to be honest. Even more ridiculous than the first story.
Yeah, I'm not an Avatar guy. All right, well, when we get to blue people, we probably should move on to the topic, and that would be sports business, all of the above. And we start off with some baseball stories. First of all, we talk changing in Washington franchise ownership, but we're not going to talk about Dan Snyder. We're talking about what's happening with the Learners and their attempted sale or partial sale or maybe no sale of the Washington Nationals. The Washington Post had an article this week, and that kind of broke some news that the Learners might not be looking to sell. They might be looking to bring on a minority owner, and then some of the pitfalls and shortcomings that are maybe between any kind of sale and the reality right now. So lots to talk about here. And the thing that we have talked about many times before that just is the elephant in every room with anything Washington Nationals is their MASN media contract rights and their constant battle with the Orioles.
Yeah, so this actually goes all the way back, really and truly, 20 years ago.
To the
Remember,
Montreal Expos.
yes, remember how it is that the Montreal Expos ended up in Washington. And this goes back to baseball's original attempt to contract. They voted 28-2 to cut the Twins and cut the Expos. Because at the time, that this was what 2001 maybe I think this happened, and they were still getting over the ratings dip after the strike in the late 90s, and baseball is going badly. And what happened is that the local government got an injunction to prevent the Twins from not playing in the local stadium there, and so that put the contraction on hold. And then after that, and Montreal was, obviously teetering on economic disaster in Montreal. So after they got,
The Major League Baseball owned the team at that point,
yeah, I'm
remember?
getting to that.
Oh,
And so
sorry.
what happened as a result of this Twins thing is that the Major League Baseball bought the team, and their idea was they were going to just terminate the team. So they paid out the owner, they got rid of him, then they terminated. But then when you couldn't contract, because you couldn't contract one team in the AL and leave the NL with another team, which is a competitive advantage and a monetary advantage, then baseball had to do something. So then they're looking to move the team. Now, Peter Angelos, who is the owner of the Baltimore Orioles, has always been and remains vehemently opposed to baseball in Washington, D.C. because the Orioles counted Washington as their home market. Major League Baseball defines every team's home market. The Rangers have Dallas. The Dallas metropolitan area. So in order to but baseball wants baseball in D.C. because D.C. is the nation's capital. It's a major market. It's a much more prominent market than Baltimore is or ever will be. And so what did they do? They had to pay off Peter Angelos to convince Angelos to allow a team in DC. Now he voted against the move, but he also didn't sue eventually. So what they did, this is Major League Baseball, then entered into an agreement with Angelos, wherein Angelos, who was the principal owner of this MASN network, which is that Metropolitan Area Sports Network, I think is what it stands for. Anyway, wherein the Angelos would control the vast income at 90% to 10% of this MASN network that's going to broadcast both the Orioles and Nationals games. And the deal was interesting in that there was a trickle of increased percentage ownership going to the Nationals over time, and so now we're up to, I forget how much, like 25% or maybe 23 to 77% or something like that now, and it's going to go up to 66% to 33% and stop there. So what all of this means to ownership of the Nationals is that they have a really craptacular income stream from local broadcasting. This, of course, is how all teams that are rich get their money. The Yankees have the Yes Network, which is like the preeminent local network. The Dodgers are making a fortune in LA, and there's others. The Nationals have no money, and the Nationals have always claimed that this is a competitive disadvantage because they can't go out and pay Bryce Harper like a king's ransom because they don't have this income. So what does all this mean towards the sale? Well, what it means is valuation is very difficult to do. Because the Nationals ain't getting out of the MASN deal anytime soon. There's been lawsuits going on forever, basically since the beginning about this. And so as a result of this, the Nationals valuation is very difficult to come about. And so they are really having problems. Ted Leonsis, who owns the Wizards, was considered to be sort of the easy, preeminent or front runner, but Leonsis can't make it work either. So now we're down to what Chris suggested. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. One, you have to. I mean, listen, I'm crying. No one should cry any tears for the learners.
No.
but, especially with for the Washington Nationals caught a really tough break in that they win the World Series, yay, and then COVID wipes out the following season. So you win the World Series, you're supposed to reap the financial rewards for at least a season, right? Even if your media, even if they sort of tanked or whatever, you still merchandise, ticket revenues are going to be up. I mean, that's when when it rains, it pours, you make hay, lemons from lemonade, all that stuff. So you make money. So not only did they just not do that well, or it didn't pan out like it made for other teams, there was no season. So, few sports franchises were as hurt individually as the Washington Nationals. Their World Series bounce was completely zeroed out. So it's been a rough couple years financially. The learners are kind of a P&L based company. Like if you're, like they own it to make money. They're not owning it just to be baseball owners. So they're highly successful in other places. It's not like they lack the money to inject it in cash if they needed to, but it has to earn its keep, so to speak. But I think what's going to happen is, you mentioned Ted Leonsis, and they're looking for, at this point, either as a plan B, or maybe they're looking for minority ownership to inject cash and energy into the business and probably be a slower succession plan over a set amount of years. And I think that's always going to have been Leonsis. I think this starts to clear the decks for that to happen with these kind of leaks and this kind of announcement and these kind of articles that come out about their intention. And if you know your Washington owner history in DC, this is exactly what Leonsis did with Abe Pollin. He bought the Capitals outright, and then some share of the stadium and some plan to long term buy the Wizards, which he eventually I think took over in 2010 fully.
Yeah. So the other part of this, which neither of us have mentioned, is that Leonsis owns NBC Sports Washington. So the big picture play would be get out of the MASN contract, put the Nationals on NBC Sports Washington, then he keeps all the money. And, of course, because the MASN deal was, the MASN deal was negotiated with the Nationals at the bottom of the leverage tranche, right? Because the reason I told you guys about all the way back to 2001 is that the Expos were teetering on the edge of collapse. They were desperate, and the only way to make it work was for them to give up a lot to exist and move to Washington, D.C. And Peter Angelos is kind of a jerk, and he's not going to. He still doesn't want the Nationals around. He's not going to voluntarily give up this income stream. And so somebody, in order for a sale that's not the way Chris describes, which is sort of a slow roll takeover, they will have to get out of this MASN deal. And it looks like that's not happening anytime soon. So if this is the way, which is sort of the, slow roll purchase over time that you're suggesting, that may be the only way to go with the Nationals. And by the way, I will go to my grave saying Dave Roberts handed the World Series to the Nationals. Just for the record, they did not win it. Dave Roberts gave it to him because of his stupidity. But go ahead.
What's really interesting to me then is a few things, but one wild card factor that we haven't even mentioned yet. We keep throwing in conditions and factors is that the Orioles are probably most likely heading for a for sale sign here in the next year. Peter Angelos is, old, probably nearing the end. His kids apparently and have sort of publicly said they have no interest in being owners of the Baltimore Orioles. So as soon as he passes, or maybe even before that, this team will go up for sale. So there's a so there's a huge wild card with that. It's probably seen as an opportunity. Rob Manfred, the commissioner of Major League Baseball, has officially entered as an official participant in negotiations to get this media deal thing, figured out, because theoretically they want to see valuations high. They'd love to see the Nationals go for $2 billion plus, because that's more than the last couple sales have been for Major League Baseball. So they have a lot of interest in having this sale be large. They also know this media deal is horrible. And I think what might happen here too is because of Leonsis owning his own media, whatever, I forget the name of it, but that regional sports
NBC
network.
Sports Washington.
Yeah. Thank you. Is he probably, to even come in at, let's say, 40%, wants resolution to that, because the learners in him bring me in 40%. Let's, if we can sort us owning our own media, right, moving it to NBC Sports Washington, even me as a 40% owner, that's part of the give-get of the relationship. So they got to get that sorted. Then even if he walks in at 35 or 45, he's already got a role, and he's going to be pretty proactive in the transition of the business.
Yeah, no, for sure. The problem here is that why would the Orioles ever voluntarily give up?
Because I think they don't care. I think it's just the same. I think I think the Angeles kids are going to want to sell so quickly that I think there's an opportunity to change it.
Yeah, no, I know, but it's a huge amount of income for the new owner. Why would the new owner agree to some arrangement that reduces their annual income stream? That's what I'm saying. Yeah, baseball could try to broker a middle ground and all of that. And, certainly that would be the fantasy result.
Well, one thing is you'd wipe away the perceived debt or the ability to sue for that lost income, because the Nationals claim is like hundreds of $1 million of lost revenue from this deal. So it could be where we're going to zero that out, and we're going to slice and dice this so that it's whatever. Nobody's really happy. It was a good negotiation, but one of the big chips is we're not going to come after any of that.
Well, sure. I mean, yeah, you do a settlement that wipes out all claims. I mean, I guess that's true, but I just think that the Orioles are still in and have been for the past 20 years the higher negotiating leverage point here. Because at the end of the day, they have a contract, the income is a lot higher, and I don't know if the Nationals are going to get what they want, ultimately anytime soon. I would question it.
They're in a sticky wicket. I totally agree. I mean, I think it's going to be some skilled negotiators, which is now at minimum a 3-way negotiation, probably more like a 5-way negotiation if you start putting in the probable new owners or partial owners that are in the mix. So there's no easy path, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's the problem. And again, who has the highest mental leverage here? It's the Orioles, Angelos.
I just think in terms of appetite for making a deal, which Angelos never had, to at least some appetite to listen. So I think that's just where the crack in is.
Well, yeah, and if you bring in a new owner who's more reasonable and you kind of handpick, who it would be, and you say, listen, here's what could happen. Major League Baseball goes, listen, homie, the only way we're gonna vote you in is if you reach a compromise point with this. Otherwise, you ain't getting in. And you wait till Angelos is dead or almost dead, and the kids are like, just pay me, we don't care what happens to any of this. And so then you just tell the new owner, you will still make a ton of money, we promise, but the only way you get approved is if you let the Nationals have their rights back. I guess that's where you're going, right, Chris? I mean, that would be the play.
And yes, because now you have, and that's why I think it was a newsworthy that Manafort, whatever his name is, has entered the building, so to speak, right? He's become official negotiator because he's going to be that gatekeeper to that process that you exactly just described. So, is it a subsidy? Is it, what is it? Now, it's interesting because if we transition, now I'm not doing just to be slick, but we transitioned to our other baseball related story, which is baseball. It looks like from a recent executive hire, moving pretty aggressively and saying, how does Major League Baseball fill the coming void in regional sports network and media rights implosion and come in and potentially centralize all of that? So what happens to two media markets, in the combined Baltimore, Washington, D.C. metropolitan area is a pretty good use case for what they might want to do.
Yeah, so what Chris is talking about is there's a story in Sports Business Journal, which if you're into sports business, which you are, if you're listening to this, you got to read this. That website generally. MLB hires Billy Chambers as Executive Vice President, Local Media by John Orand, who we've done a lot, dated January 12th. So Billy Chambers is billed in the story as I'd never heard this name before, but billed in the story as one of the country's most experienced regional sports networks executives. And where the story's going, it says, to quote them, this hire is a clear sign that Major League Baseball has decided that it needs to take a more active role in producing and distributing its games. Because if you go to the NFL, the NFL does not grant its teams local broadcast rights except for preseason games. And the NFL has like a communist approach to it, wherein everybody shares all the money and et cetera. Baseball is not like that. Baseball, as we said before, a huge amount of the income for each team is the local broadcast revenue. Yes, Network, Dodgers, all that, what we said. And so what this story is hinting at is that when they say Major League Baseball wants to take a more active role, that could potentially mean that Major League Baseball keeps some, all, or a portion of the rights to local broadcasting, which would change the revenue model in Major League Baseball completely. And it's a sign to me that maybe Major League Baseball thinks that the NFL's communist model might be better. That's sort of the implicit undertones of what they're talking about here.
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, it might be a bit of a moonshot, but even getting halfway there has got a lot of value, because it's going to be difficult. Because the reality is, your Yes networks, your Dodgers networks are wildly successful. Obviously, a giant revenue stream for those teams, but they just continue to underpin the haves and haves not economic culture of baseball, and because of that, Major League Baseball, if they went to this sort of centralized, regional media rights approach, would have a very tough time unseating the Yes Network and whatever they call the Dodgers Network, right? It would be, those fiefdoms, which is what Major League Baseball is, are too powerful, right? You need too many siege weapons to get over their walls. So it's very difficult to take them on. So I think I think baseball's doing is like, okay, so let them do that, and we're going to start to fill in the gaps. And maybe down the road, 10 years, it looks so appealing that, it'll be easier to flip your Yes networks. But in the meantime, we'll just step into these voids, which is going to be 2/3 of the baseball media landscape, and start giving alternative, plans and ways to just centralize all of those rights, to the payments for those rights, and then the variety of distribution deals and point of payment models.
Yeah, and you could theoretically force some arrangement wherein some portion of the regional sports network income goes to baseball and it's redistributed.
Yeah,
or
that's a good
some
one. Yeah,
or some percentage over
they pay a
over
tax
a baseline
essentially
amount
to operate.
Yeah, basically. And so like the rich teams, the Dodgers, the Yankees wouldn't like that, but if baseball could force them to do it, that would be a more equal distribution. And I would think along with that, you'd have to maybe have a salary cap. Because right now it's like, again, I love my Dodgers, and the Dodgers have done a terrible job of leveraging this. But the Dodgers can literally buy any player they want, and so can the Yankees. And there's a couple other teams like that too. And again, some teams the Dodgers are terrible at it, but they have so much money from the regional sports network. If they want to write a $500 million check, they can. Whereas the Nationals, because their income is so whacked out because of this MASN deal, that they can't do that. This is why, like, Bryce Harper went to the Phillies. The Nationals don't have that kind of income. whereas like the Dodgers, the Yankees, and others do. And so the idea here, sort of big picture, is that you want to eliminate baseball. Major League Baseball would want to eliminate the haves and have-nots, and have every team on a more equal footing to be able to um, sign, buy players, and thereby making the league more competitive and more appealing to everybody. So for every like Milwaukee Brewers, um, right now, who are, the Orioles or whoever's in the tank, you've got these rich teams, and so distributing the income more equally would be a competitive balance thing, and that's what Major League Baseball is wanting to do.
And the hiring of this guy, this chap, really what it signals is they get a very seasoned, knowledgeable executive in the field who understands it. And, we aren't exactly sure how this will materialize for them, but they brought somebody in creative and successful who's going to be able to chart. His job right now is not to do it. His job right now is to write the strategy, essentially, and lay the roadmap out for baseball over the next 3, 5, and 10 years around, their strategy for media rights for regions. Because, and I think it's actually Oran that said this in something I either read or listened to earlier this week, that it's not that, okay, these networks are failing, for a variety of reasons, not because there isn't enormous value in the media rights for those teams, right? So people are going to say no one cares about watching these teams in their locale. Yes, they do. Just because the business model to serve that was broken doesn't mean that the media rights still aren't gold. And you open this up even to this, if this really becomes a little bit more of a free market or kind of a bazaar of media rights, you could imagine all kinds of entities. I mean, you can imagine an Apple sweeping in and taking a region, or something like that, and say we're going to serve the Northwest for certain sport or whatever it is, or division. I mean, there's actually all kinds of things that open up if this actually starts to become a competitive landscape. And I think Major League Baseball kind of also wants to head that off.
Or like in an extreme scenario, you have Major League Baseball eventually acquiring all the broadcast rights and negotiating one contract for the entire league. I think that's a lot tougher to do. In national football, in NFL, it's a lot easier because the games are primarily on Sunday. Whereas Major League Baseball is playing every day. I think it is a little different, but that would be sort of like the 20 years from now, long-term play that maybe Major League Baseball might be thinking of, and that would affect competitive balance, because that would allow every team to basically more or less be on a far more equal economic footing. So that might be where they're going with this. I think we've been pretty good, Chris, to toot our horns about predicting the future with these kind of things. And I do think that that's probably where they want to go. But this Billy Chambers guy is probably the first step in it.
Yeah, it's like if you're used to watching sports and the sort of comings and goings of how sports teams on that sort of field or ice or pitch or whatever are put together, it's also interesting to look at the boardrooms, right? And this is what, how are you staffing up? Oh, we want to run the ball next year. That means we're going to get these kind of players. So, the moves that these companies make do signal some interesting things. And this one to me was this was a flare going up into the sky about what Major League Baseball wants to do.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is step 1 of 100. Okay.
Yeah.
This is not, like I said, we've been pretty good about predicting the future. And what we're telling you is this is a sign that Major League Baseball will try to go down this road. This does not mean it happened tomorrow or even in the next several years. But you're right. I think Chris said it best. This is setting a stage for this Billy Chambers guy to develop a strategy wherein they will begin to head down that road. That's where we are with this.
So there's a good one to watch. Another one that, we're always one of our favorite punching bags, the NCAA. There's a couple stories related to the NCAA that we'll get into. One, some of these stories coming off the heels of just a compelling, action-packed, tense college football championship game. So, I don't know, Steve, if you watched any of the national championship games.
To be honest,
what a barn burner.
To be honest, I didn't know it was on. This is where I am with college football. It has been so ruined with NIL and a bunch of other things for me that I didn't know that it was on until I saw the headline in the news the next morning.
Yeah. Well, you missed nothing. I was like, oh, I'll watch this because I really don't care about college football at this point, and I didn't expect a very good game. So I'm like, well, I'm gonna watch this. I think a movie or something I had to do, and then I'll move over into the third quarter and watch the end of the game. And then I turned it on the middle of the third quarter.
It was like 40 to nothing or
175 to 3 or whatever. So I was like, oh, I guess that plan is gone. But whatever. That doesn't really affect any of the business issues of the NCAA. But we normally beat up on the NCAA, but there are some things that seem a little bit smarter. We talked about the Massachusetts governor stepping in as the new head of the NCAA, and that seems to be showing immediately in their strategy. As we read an article in The Athletic, I believe. Let me get I have it here right now. But the article is basically about how they're looking toward the federal government to fix their problems. The genie's out of the bottle with NIL and a bunch of other stuff. Just what is college athletics is being, blown up. It's escaped already, and they see as a last gasp stopgap effort, at least in my opinion, is let the daddy federal government bail them out.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, I got to toot our own horn for some of this because we told you years ago in the early days of this show that this is where this was going, and sure, it's come to fruition. So if you go back in the Wayback Machine to what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the reason why the NCAA is now in the name, image, and likeness situation that it's in is that the state of California forced them to change. The California passed a bill that said that college athletes have the right in the state of California to sign marketing deals. And after that happened, the genie was out of the bottle, and you can't have California teams have a major competitive disadvantage over every other team in the country. And so then the NCAA, and there were a couple other states that followed suit. I think Florida might have been one of them. Don't quote me on Florida, but there were a couple other states after that. And then at that point, then the NCAA had to just make it legal for everybody. So this is where we are. But what this is about is, what's the guy's name, Chris? Butler?
I will get it here in a second, but let's catch.
Okay,
well,
so
here, let me just say the article. Guy got
right.
it in front of me. Then I'll find his name. The NCAA has rallied around its main priority for 2023, Get Help from Congress, by Nicole Auerbach, published on January 12th in The Athletic. Go ahead.
Okay, so the guy they hired to be the new NCAA head, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, was the former governor of Massachusetts. And interestingly, he was a Republican in probably the most left-leaning state in the country, certainly one of them. And so that tells you, as we told you before, that this guy is a deal maker and can operate in difficult environments, because you don't get elected as a Republican if in Massachusetts if you can't do that. So we were predicting that this was the road that the NCAA wanted to go down. Sure enough, what this article is talking about is getting help from Congress. What does that mean? The NCAA is afraid that if 50 states are passing 50 different laws about what exactly college athletes can do or cannot do, and money they can make and can't make, that it's going to be very difficult for them to operate as a national institution. And really what they're worried about really is some states declaring that college athletes are employees of the university. And if that happens, then that there's a whole list of things that universities have to do for these players. If they're employees, they have to be paid. And then they'll probably do benefits, a certain amount of benefits. Is there workers' comp involved? All kinds of stuff. So the NCAA is trying to avoid that, because also, I mean, the NCAA doesn't really control these universities. At the end of the day, they can't necessarily force the University of Iowa to do this if the University of Iowa just utterly refuses. So what they're looking for is Congress to pass some sort of law that regulates this and essentially says that that college athletes are not employees. At the heart of it, that's what they want. They want Congress to do that. Um, whether that happens or not, I don't know. This has been to the Supreme Court already. There have been a couple different lawsuits, and they all lose in the Supreme Court. Um, the argument that players are employees. There was one, I forget, it was from Northwestern, I think, where they wanted to form a players union, and that got shut down. So they've been winning in the courts, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to keep winning. And so this is ultimately all about. That it's getting Congress to say players don't have to be employees.
Yeah, but Charlie Baker is the former
Thank you, Baker. I knew it started with a
governor.
B. I said Butler.
So Charlie Baker is the dude, and yeah, and by the way, it sounds like in the way this article reads that his sort of wing person that he's got embedded as a president is this Linda Livingstone, who seems to be whipping for him within the kind of presidents.
Explain what whipping means for the non-politically inclined.
Getting support, right? So going through and getting enough people.
There's a congressional whip who's like the number two, and their job is to kind of be the
issue, I guess.
They're the COO whose job it is to kind of rally the troops. So, go ahead.
Ensure you have the votes. So, well, she doesn't have the official title of whip, but she is whipping here, and it's this recent Board of Governors meeting is when this started to bubble up, and she became the mouthpiece for this. It really does show you what the NCAA strategy is. They didn't hire somebody who is going to be able to think creatively. I'm not saying that Charlie Baker couldn't, so I'm not knocking him. But they didn't get somebody who was going to be a rules nerd, a governance nerd, that was going to look at the policies of the NCAA and put a coalition together for policies as a body that looks at college athletics that could move them forward. They didn't get someone like that. They got someone who's essentially a lobbyist, right? This is like, let's get in the, CEO lobbyist type who can go in there, who knows these halls of power, who can put deals together, because, as to your point, not only can we not do it from our own, we can't control our own universities within our system. We also can't control what those 50 states do in terms of their employee definition. So it's not even that, it's also not that something of that changes, but it potentially changes in 35 different ways. What's
that's
one Iowa's California. So, there's a variant. So they basically have to say, federal government, save us from ourselves and tell us what the policy should be, and then rein in your 50 states, right? Really, go to your centralized federal power to make definitions that they all have to heel toe to, so that we don't have to, one, just have our bubble burst, and then worse, have our bubble burst 25 different ways across all those states.
Yeah, they're running to daddy, basically. I mean, there's a dispute with the children, and so they're running to daddy.
And they hired as such.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, I mean, my political leaning being what it is, I kind of bristle at increased federal authority over stuff. I just don't generally like that, but I sort of understand where the NCAA is coming from, because they are in a difficult situation. If you have, like, California loves unions, loves employee rights, all of that. So you would think like a state like California, for example, would maybe have a more of an inclination to allow players, NCAA athletes, college athletes, to form unions and sort of treat them as employees and give them rights, whereas there are other states that won't. And so what Chris's point is valid, which is what the real problem comes in, that if you have 25 states do one thing and the other 25 states do something else, and then they have a real problem on their hand. And this is all the NCAA's stupidity has caused all this problem, because the NCAA's are idiots and run by idiots, and they have allowed this to fester. Because they have an inability to lead, an inability to govern, an inability to do anything, which is why I've been saying, and Chris has too, that we think the NCAA needs to just be thrown in the trash can, because they're horrible. So what do? I mean, you run to Congress and say, please, Congress, Mr. and Mrs. Congressman, declare that a college athlete is not an employee. If you could summarize it in one sentence, that's what they want Congress to do. Whether or not they'll get Congress to do that is another story. I mean, it's a good question. What will the inclination of the House and the Senate be in something like this? I mean, I would think the House of Representatives would be more inclined, being now controlled by the GOP, would be more inclined to sort of rule against employee rights, whereas the Senate may be more inclined. But there's not going to be a lot that gets done in Congress in this next 2 years, no matter what, because now they're both parties have power.
And also, just timing wise, it might not even land where they would have a chance to enact anything within that window, regardless of who's in power.
Yeah.
So, these aren't necessarily things that are going to happen by next month, right? These are things that are going to wind their way through.
It's a long-term play.
Yeah, this is going to play out over some time, and I think realistically, whatever, let's say the federal government, and if we get away from the sort of right, left, or daddy love me type stuff, they're basically asking for the federal government to play referee, right? We'll stay in the metaphor world. We can't. No one knows what a catch is. I don't. All this. Like, we need some kind of theoretically third body to come in here and set some common sense rules that we are then all forced to abide by. And that's what, and basically the NCAA is saying, we can't handle it. You handle it, ref, or we're looking to the refs for decision, which I find fascinating on so many levels. And you can make a case that the federal government does set, what is employee, they have, they have a role. They do that in other industries. So you can see a theory here about why this is going to happen. But we'll see. I think at least the NCAA knows its fight. So,
which is more you can say from what they've how they've acted before.
And I think what this might mean too is it's never going to go back. Right. You're never going to restore some year 2000 status quo.
Well, they ripped the bandage off with NIL. I mean, you can't erase that,
Right. So can the federal government be a creative referee and actually say what could work? And then all the things we talked about ad nauseum come onto the table in terms of what the solution paths are. But I think even if the federal government says, okay, we'll step in here and help everyone sort this out, I think it's still going to look radically different. And I think you'd have even that transcends typical right-left narratives. I think you have some sticky things that I think you can't guess how people are going to necessarily think about this.
Well, that's kind of where I was going with it. There's not really an easy right-left narrative to be had here. Like, you can kind of figure out if you're going to predict the military budget. There's an easy right-left, narrative, for the most part. This is not that. There's not an easy path, and so you need somebody to lobby these people. Enter Charlie Baker. It's tough. But before we move on, Chris, I want to ask you this. Do you think players, NCAA athletes, should be considered employees? Or maybe it's not that easy.
It's not easy. So, I hate getting boxed into this corner, but I'll start in this corner and then box my way out. No. So, I think I think my starting point is it would be very difficult to just, claim that these are employees. I think it's too complex. There's too many things. The system, it's almost like a too big to fail type of thing here a little bit, where there's so many cascading effects. And if you did it wrong, you have just a endless array of unintended consequences. So you might as well try to be as conscious about those unintended consequences as possible. Now, however, do I think that status quo or how we delineate these things or, is sustainable or even correct? No, I don't. And so I think you've got to get to some solutions-based things here that aren't going to look like anything that already existed, and everyone's going to have to give a little bit, because that's the only way forward. And then you've emerged some kind of quasi-employee or new status or something that makes more sense, because I think, I will start on the other side saying it's ridiculous that some of the labor, the revenues generated on the labor of issue has got to be solved.
Yeah, it's kind of a complex issue because, these athletes, particularly in football and men's basketball, are providing an immense amount of income based on a lot of labor on these players. On the other hand, these players are already on scholarship. Nearly all of them, for football and men's basketball, and so in a sense they are receiving value already, and so then you're asking universities to come up with a system wherein they need to pay these people some amount of money on top of the value of their scholarship. I mean, you can't just ignore the value of the scholarship. You cannot, So that's So I think that's the key for me. My inclination, if you want me to give a yes or no answer, would be that no, I don't think they ought to be considered employees. Like you said, it's very, very complicated. This is not just a case of, we need some workers at McDonald's, and so we're going to go hire these people. It's very complicated. So my inclination is to say no, like you. But I think all of the advocates for employee status are forgetting about the scholarship. You'd have to put the value of the scholarship into the calculus, and I don't think that it would come out very favorable. And you can't. I mean, it would fundamentally change the entire way college sports operates, which maybe is a good thing. If you force universities to start paying these people market value, from university funds, there you're talking about a totally different system. So I don't think the world is ready for that.
Probably not, but I hope. I would love for this to be not a debate about either war, but new or next, right? Like that. That would actually, I'd love to see it get to some level of that, because I think that's the only way you move forward with some of this. And maybe when we're talking about the level of money that we're talking about, it almost forces people to think about new or next rather than either or. I think that's the space that we're moving into, though. And we're not going to go over and say some of the things that we think could be interesting ways forward. We've done that just a ton, but I think the door is starting to open for some of those conversations. That's what this tells me.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so we go from something super complex, multifaceted, got all kinds of sort of little mini theaters for big issues like state rights, federal government power, labor, what's employment, what's in education, what's the value of this, to something that means absolutely nothing by its own definition. And that is the world of professional wrestling, which is, of course, is dominated by the WWE and the endless drama of the McMahon family and their stewardship, ownership of WWE and all of its entertainment properties. It looks like he's back. He was put back on the board, I think, like a month or 2 months ago, recently. And then the board unanimously elevated him back into whatever it is, president. And as his daughter stepped away from her sort of temporary CEO-ship and back into family life. And apparently all this is to set up a sale, which I think when it happens will blow people's minds at the dollar amount.
When owners make themselves the entertainment. Is there one single person walking on this planet who is surprised that Vince McMahon mysteriously came back out of nowhere?
No.
mean, we told you.
Another thing we predicted, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We told you from the beginning this was a setup. This was a WWE plot cooked up. Now there may be some truth to maybe they were legitimate claims of sexual harassment, out there. I really don't know. We didn't dig into those too much, but all of this was a setup from the beginning. This is Major League Baseball or Major League Baseball, WWE entertaining themselves, all of that. Now I do think this is going to go for like 10 figures at least. It's going to be enormous, because I'm not really into wrestling. I don't think you are, Chris, particularly either, really. But remember we did some stories on this. They have large TV contracts, large Fox. They're on primetime Fox now on Fridays, I think. And they do major like arenas, shows that go around the country and stuff. So it is a large number, and Vince McMahon is a key figure in the drama cog. So they need him around, and so all of this was just a setup, I think.
Oh, totally. We said it was his heel turn, 6 months ago. Now he gets, everyone knows that famous animated GIF of him like strutting in up to the ring. That's just him strutting back into the boardroom, the whole nine. Totally. And it turned out, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, but the gist of the issue, quote unquote, that drove him out of the leadership of WWE was a consensual relationship with a staffer. So it was inappropriate dating. It turned out to be what the majority of it was. So kind of cooked up, you can say, so it's, and because notice any of the articles about this change that happened this week, none of them even go into why he was really drummed out, right? Like it's just all about the comings and goings and yada yada and just the boardroom wrestling.
Yeah, this is like a primetime drama in real life, and I promise you, they're going to have some WWE SmackDown show where Vince McMahon does his strut back into the stage and all of that. I mean, this is what they're setting up, okay? And I don't think wrestling fans have a negative opinion about Vince McMahon necessarily. I mean, he's kind of the heel, a lot of times, but they enjoy the character he plays. And so this was always a setup, and like this was not a hostile takeover by Stephanie McMahon ever. This is something they cooked up, and it will be that way. So
yes, and also it doesn't mean that they're not going to sell. In fact, I think all of this just helps. Headlines and. All this is just, I think, kind of a mini pump and dump of them trying to sell the company anyway.
Pump and dump, kind of, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, so, I think that's legit. I don't think they're necessarily faking on the sale. And just to underscore a point about they sit on so all the TV contracts, all of their events, yes, but they also sit on a mountain of IP.
Yes.
And what did we just talk about at the beginning of the show, talking about movies, is that, entertainment executives are sitting around saying, what do we already own that we can mine, reboot, repackage, remix, have a sequel, have a prequel, do a side story. So, I mean, the best way to illustrate this is remember when they wouldn't let Dwayne Johnson use The Rock. In fact, they didn't let him use The Rock because they owned the IP of The Rock. They owned that character because it is, in fact,
they made him buy it.
Yeah, I think that, or maybe they traded him when he came. Remember, because he came back.
Buy in like some sense. They had to cut a deal, if I recall.
Yeah, and I think it meant him coming back and doing X amount of WWE things as The Rock. So, which he probably had no interest in, considering the rest of his career at that point. So they can do cartoons, they can do toys. I mean, so you're also buying just a massive amount of monetizable IP on top of the events and the TV contracts.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree.
Hulk Hogan,
Well, that was what I was about to say. I mean, you could resurrect Hulk Hogan, maybe not have him wrestle, maybe come back as a manager or something. I mean, who knows? But there's all kinds of things you could do with those characters because a bunch of them are still, a lot of them have died of like health problems and stuff recently. But there are many older characters they could resurrect, and not that NFTs are a thing, but you could resurrect some old properties and try to do something with them. You could do that. But I think that Vince McMahon is like in his mid-70s at this point. So he may be looking to cash out and retire, and go out in a blaze of glory. And by that, I mean, pump the value up and cash out at a high point and, retire with billions. That may be.
Yeah. And the main benefactor of that is Stephanie McMahon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is.
But at this point, Stephanie's not young anymore. I mean,
no, she's a middle age, So yeah, so this is all in cahoots. This is all staged and planned. Doesn't mean it won't change hands or that this isn't a real business or all these other things that we talked about. But
it is a real business. It for sure is a real business. It's sort of art imitating life, imitating art a little bit is what's going on here. Because the owner Vince McMahon actually is the real owner and controlling interest in WWE. He really is for real. But he's inserted himself in the drama and the product that he's presented over decades, and so all of this. I think it's partly just because he enjoys being in the middle of it. He's probably a narcissist and just loves being involved in it. Because he could step away and they could still have the drama of the entertainment product, but I think he just likes being in it. And he's a major character. So that's we'll see. I have no idea who would buy it, but there would be plenty of buyers out there.
Oh, I think it'd be one. I think it would be who we always talk about. You could imagine. Like a Disney buying it. You could imagine an Amazon buying it and just, you could just, you just add all that. You could imagine this Discovery, that now owns Time Warner, that whole new conglomerate. You can imagine them buying it just because of the, I think it'll be one of those players.
Yeah, somebody. Or it could be, who knows, some equity, private equity type we've never heard of. I mean, there's people like that buy stuff like this all the time. It doesn't necessarily have to be Time Warner. It could be almost anybody.
Totally. But it is a fun story to follow both because there actually are a lot of business dynamics that just make it interesting, even if it was like a boring product, and because, they certainly jazz it up.
I'm not really a fan of like the watching wrestling personally. I think this is more interesting to me than watching, I don't even know who the characters are anymore. Watching some wrestling match that's a setup for, 15 minutes.
Yeah, I have been a pro wrestling fan at times in my life, and I kind of love the history and culture of it. But I find the WWE's like loud, over the top, all
It's too
flash
much.
to be not enjoyable.
Yeah, me neither. That's not really kind of way I roll.
But if you take me to some regional one at like an VFW hall or something, that's a lot of fun.
Do those things still exist?
They still exist, yeah. They do. They do still exist. Strangely enough. All right, that's your assignment before our next episode is to go find yourself a regional wrestling match somewhere.
Okay. Yeah.
Bespoke pro wrestling. Artisanal pro wrestling, if you will. So, Steve, what's going on? You're probably moving into the off-season phase.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the Hog Side will continue to roll on. We are going to continue on with the Thursday morning shows through the Super Bowl. So we can preview, review the last week's and playoffs games and preview the upcoming ones and whatnot. Then we'll transition to our off-season schedule when we do our position group breakdowns and draft previews and all that stuff. I need to figure all of that out in the next week or two. Rick Snyder's Seasons of Discontent is going to be in hiatus for a while. If and when Washington sells, the Snyders sell the team, they will be back. And by the way, there's, we saw a couple stories about a couple other potential buyers in addition to Jeff Bezos. So who knows if and when that'll happen. But we also have all of regular written content. So stay tuned.
All right. I'll give you fans out there something to watch for in the sports business tip is look for Monday night's game, and what you're listening to this might have already happened, what the ratings were for Monday night. It's Tampa Bay, obviously Tom Brady, versus Dallas Cowboys, so the marquee game, prime time, Monday Night Football. Okay, you would have figured the ratings would have been already good, but this is the first game that's on the mothership ABC and not ESPN. So, and I think maybe they have a couple more between now and the Super Bowl, I'm not sure, but this is the first NFL game on ABC all year. Those executives and teams have been planning for this night since this was announced. This is a huge night. I'm really curious to see what the number is on this game. I think it'll be above 30 million, and I think it'll be huge. And so it's interesting how these streamers toggle, right? ESPN, it's all Disney, so they throw it on ESPN until you're marquee, and then they throw it over to ABC and let ABC pump all its properties and all that. So it'd be really interesting. So go back and if you're listening to this, go and see if you can find what the number was for that Monday night game.
Yeah, it'll be huge.
Yeah. All right. See you in 2 weeks.